Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who is watching this via live stream. Before you leave today, if you would just fill out one of the evaluation slips in the back and drop it in that basket on their way out, we really appreciate that because it helps us with our programming. Any of your feedback helps us a lot. And speaking of future programs, do mark your calendars for Tuesday, June 7th. We will be hosting author Beth Brickell to discuss her latest work, Solving the Maud Crawford Puzzle, the final book in her series that explores what happened to the Camden community leader, Maud Crawford. And we are delighted to have LaDonna Humphrey here with us today. LaDonna is a writer, documentary producer, investigative journalist, nonprofit executive, and true crime fanatic. Her passions include advocating for missing adults, crime victims, children in foster care, and for women in recovery. LaDonna is also the co-founder of All the Lost Girls, which is a nonprofit dedicated to finding justice for female strangulation cold cases in the United States. She'll be selling and signing books after this event at that table in the back. So please help me welcome LaDonna Humphrey.
Thank you so much for being here today. I know it's Mother's Day weekend, and I'm excited to be here in Arkansas. I spent most of last week in Las Vegas, and it made me very grateful for Northwest Arkansas, so I'm glad to be home. But I did get to go to CrimeCon, so that was a lot of fun. But she did a wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. My name is LaDonna Humphrey, and I am the author of The Girl I Never Knew. And just to kind of tell you a little bit about how I got involved with the case, in 2015, there were a group of us that had worked for almost a decade and a half on missing persons cases. We were the founders of an organization called Let's Bring Them Home, and we specialized in assisting families and law enforcement with missing adult cases. So during that time, we saw the rise of NamUs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a government database. So as you can imagine, it's federally funded, and they could do the job that we were doing much better, and it was funded by the federal government. So we decided, we were really passionate about the work that we do. How can we, finish off, this decade and a half of this work that we had done and continue on the message of the plight of missing adults? So we decided on a documentary. It's nothing we'd ever done before. Several of us have a journalism background, but this was new territory. So we started looking at cases in Arkansas, particularly Northwest Arkansas. My team kept saying, let's look at the Melissa Witt case. And I kept saying, no, her body was discovered. She's not a missing person. That doesn't fit our criteria. I mean, this went on back and forth for weeks, as you can imagine. And finally I said, okay, I'll look at the Witt case, but I'm not real sure that that's what we want to choose as our documentary. So long story short, it was really clear to us that they were very passionate about Melissa's case, and the more that we heard, the more invested I became personally. So we decided, okay, this is it, this is the case. So really it started that way, pretty innocently. We are from this area, we're all close to Melissa's age, but there was so much more to the case than what we could have imagined. And then getting to know the investigators who were retiring from the department, who had spent years and years and years trying to find justice for Melissa, we knew we had to do something for her. So that's really how this started. I never really planned on writing a book. COVID is what changed my mind. If you can see the front row here, I've got lots of kids with me, those are mine. So I was home for almost 2 years with some kiddos and had some extra time on my hands, if you can call that extra time on your hands when you have a bunch of little kids. But I decided that I get so many questions about Melissa's case, the documentary, and all the knowledge that I have, gathered over the years, that maybe a book was a good idea. So here I am. I pitched the idea to several publishers. I had several takers, and I chose Genius Press. I've been really excited about that. But that's really how it got started. Melissa's case is completely solvable. I believe we're really, really close. And I'm hopeful that the book will get us even closer. So has everybody here read the book? Have you read it yet? No? Okay. So if you're here today, I'm going to gift you a copy of the book because you came to see me today. So if you have read the book, you'll know some of this. But people ask me a lot of different things about the dynamics of the two detectives that I work with. So I work pretty exclusively with the retired Captain J.C. Ryder and the retired Captain Chris Boyd. Both are out of law enforcement now, but both consult very regularly on Melissa's case. And since the time the book has launched, I think one of the biggest questions I get, besides did I know Melissa, which I didn't, I never had the pleasure of knowing her, is tell me what your dynamic is like with investigators. So the reading that I've chosen today, I'm going to read out of chapter 18, and then I'm going to read the final chapter. And I think this gives you a good synopsis of who J.C. Ryder and Chris Boyd are, but it also really summarizes why I'm so passionate about Melissa's case. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to take some time to read. Chapter 18, Detective Boyd. When I first sat down to interview the former Fort Smith detective, Chris Boyd, in 2015, he projected not only strength and determination, but also a rare approachability that was in stark contrast to J.C. Ryder's tough and intimidating demeanor. Interviewing the two seasoned detectives was an honor. It was fascinating to hear firsthand accounts of their experiences as detectives in the Major Crimes Unit. Their stories, sometimes dark, other times humorous, painted a picture of how the two men forged an unlikely lifelong friendship in the midst of serving their community and keeping dangerous criminals off the street. I've known J.C. Ryder since the late 1970s, Boyd said. He has been great. He has been known for and the fact that he is completely fearless. He was always ready for a fight. Boyd smiled as he recounted stories of his friend and former colleague. We didn't actually become close friends until we started working together in major crimes. And we very quickly discovered that we could benefit from a ham and egg type of relationship. I had been a detective longer than Ryder, so I kept him grounded with legalities and proper procedures. Ryder saw our cases very differently than I did, Boyd explained. His narcotics background and experience led him to be a whiz with informants and interrogations. His outside-the-box detective work blended well with my formal and traditional methods. We were a great team. And I think that's important to share because this is one of my favorite chapters, just learning the personalities of the detectives, because they still really approach Melissa's case the same way. J.C. Ryder is still quite a fighter, and he's in his early 70s, and he's just not going to give up on his quest for justice for Melissa Witt. Detective Boyd, and we call him Chris. Chris is much different. He's much more relaxed, but he's always reminding us that some of our ideas maybe aren't the greatest, right? And so, we have a text thread where the three of us talk frequently about Melissa's case. He keeps us centered and grounded, and he keeps us focused on what the long-term goal is, which is to find Melissa's killer. Being a part of this investigation has been, it's been exciting, it's been sad, it's been difficult. At the end of the day, this is not supposed to be a sensational piece of entertainment. This is a true story about a 19-year-old girl that was murdered, and I do want to keep people focused on that. And I try to do that with the book. I try to stay centered with what is important, how we stay focused on finding her killer, but we also keep people interested in the case at the same time. That's a very delicate balance because we live in a society that consumes true crime as something that's very exciting and sensational. The final chapter of the book is what I'm going to share today, if that's okay. It's just a few pages. And this, to me, is probably the most important chapter of the book because we firmly believe that Melissa's killer is still alive. We believe that Melissa's killer is still watching the case on a regular basis. We believe that I've had regular contact with Melissa's murderer, which makes it frightening, but it also makes it thrilling in the sense that we know that perhaps justice is still a possibility in her case. In the book, I talk extensively about all of the suspects. And one of the things that makes the book unique and my position unique in Melissa's case is that outside of J.C. Ryder, I am the only living person that has talked to all of the suspects in Melissa's case, which is just, that blows my mind that happened. So it's very important that I tell her story and that I share the information that we have and that we put it all together in one place. So if, God forbid, that her case isn't solved in the next year or 2 years, that whoever comes behind us will have all of that information documented. I take it very seriously. It's a burden sometimes to carry, to know that I've had that kind of contact with those people through the last 7 years of Melissa's case, and to know that that's been a difficult task for investigators. And when we do a Q&A, I hope there's some questions about why that would be. I can tell you that have been 13 people in the past 27 years that have had her case. And so, it's not the same person. It gets passed down, and everybody has a different approach to how they're going to solve that cold case. But this is chapter 20. It's a letter to Melissa's killer. When this journey began in 2015, my team and I had only one goal: to complete a documentary about the abduction and murder of Melissa Witt. Our plan was to share Melissa's story with the world in hopes of seeing her case resolved. Looking back, it's clear that we were all naive in our belief that this project would be completed in 6 to 8 months, with little to no impact on our personal lives. I'm actually quoted in an interview as saying, "We're excited to tackle this project. Our plan is to complete this documentary in less than a year and quickly move on to our next project." At that time, I had no idea that the murder of a 19-year-old college student would forever alter the course of my life. Over the past 7 years, I have frequently been asked the same question: do you have any regrets about the amount of time and energy you have spent working on the Witt case? Without hesitation, my response is always the same: I have no regrets. And while I didn't initially set out to devote my life to solving Melissa's murder, fate had other plans. Fighting for justice on her behalf has become a large portion of my life's work. In fact, just yesterday, a reporter asked me, "Do you think Melissa's killer is concerned that your life's work is fueled by the passion you have to see this case solved?" My response: I sure as hell hope he is. He needs to be, because I won't give up, ever. The man that murdered Melissa Witt created irreparable damage for her family, her friends, and an entire community. The suffering that was born from Melissa's death demands justice. And the only way to achieve that goal is to aggressively seek out the last few pieces of that intricate puzzle that surrounds her murder. As fate would have it, I am standing on the very cusp of the 27th anniversary of Melissa's murder as I write this final chapter. It seems only fitting that the closing words I pen are meant for only one person: Melissa's murderer. I continue an exhaustive search for you, even on the days when the sun is shining and I walk down the street with my family. I am searching. Until I find you, I will forever gaze into every crowd and wonder if you are there among the sea of faces. Are you a dark and dreadful serial killer, spending your life methodically killing innocent young women, or a coward hiding behind the cloak of mundane normalcy? Either way, you are a man that carries evil in his heart, a curse that permeates every ounce of your being. Excuse me. I see you, a sad, pathetic womanizer whose life is filled with broken relationships, chaos, anger issues, and fear. This is who you are, a man whose fragile ego demanded he murder a beautiful 19-year-old girl. How often do you relive that December night when Melissa rejected your advances, the moment you felt so humiliated, angry, and small? When I close my eyes, I can envision the moment Melissa refused to acquiesce to your selfish demands. I want to scream and warn her to run, but it's too late. I watch as your white-hot rage swells. I open my eyes. I know what comes next. My heart will not allow me to imagine it. Your thoughts, I know, were clouded by visions of murder as you drove deep into the Ozark National Forest that cold December night. The only witnesses to your crime were the white oak trees and the short-leaf pine that trembled and swayed as Melissa's terrified screams echoed through their leaves and into the dark abyss of the forest. Decades later, as I stood underneath those same tall, shadowed trees and among the clumps of bushes and snaking undergrowth that once embraced the lifeless body of Melissa Witt, I vowed to find you, and I will. But until that day comes, our lives will remain intertwined, connected by fate, through the common thread of a girl you brutally murdered, a girl I never knew. So I'm going to open it up for questions now. My kids don't get to ask questions. They're sitting up here. But really, this is a small group, and when I was at CrimeCon, we had lots and lots and lots of questions, so I think it's exciting to be able to answer. If you have any questions for anybody that's here. Yes?
How do you know that it was a male? How do you believe that it's a male?
That's a good question that you asked that. I've had lots of people ask me that question too. Law enforcement are convinced that Melissa was sexually assaulted. She was found nude when they found her body in the Ozark National Forest. And her last moments at Bowling World, and let me back that up a little bit to answer that question a little bit more. So on December 1st of 94, Melissa drove to Bowling World in the evening after she had gotten off work. Her mother was on a league and had invited her to come for a hamburger. Melissa went home and changed clothes. Neighbors had seen her there. We know that she arrived at Bowling World because her car was later found there, but she never made it inside. Witnesses saw that there was some sort of argument between Melissa and another male. We don't know who that is. And then she was missing for 45 days before her body was found. So law enforcement have narrowed it down pretty significantly to 3 suspects, 2 of who are named that I write about extensively in the book. Can we say for sure? I don't think you can say anything for sure, but I think that the investigation has led us to be fairly confident that her murderer was a male, most likely someone that she knew or had had a relationship with at some point in her life, even for a short amount of time. And the killing of Melissa, people ask me all the time, was it a serial killer? We don't know. Could have been. It was pretty disorganized at the crime scene. There were blood pools, there were things left behind at the crime scene. But then when they found her body in the Ozark National Forest, that scene was very organized. Almost as if someone had gone back several times to clean up the crime scene, to hide evidence, maybe to take some other things with them. That's possible. Personally, and I'm not an expert, I've just worked on this for 7 years, and what I know is I don't believe that it was a serial killer. I don't believe that, and I know law enforcement would probably stand here with me today and say the same thing. Did that answer your question? Sure. Kind of the long way. What else? Does anybody else have any questions?
What chapter did you find the most difficult personally to write?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say the most difficult chapter to write was Diary Confessions. One of the things that I've been allowed to do over the past 7 years is to look at the case files and have access to Melissa Witt's diary. That was really difficult for me. I'm not really sure why, other than, that's someone's private thoughts, and even though it's really important that those who are that close to the investigation should have access to the diary because we believe the killer's name could be in that diary, it was just difficult to see that, she was very innocent, very young, very goal-oriented, vibrant, and her life was just completely snatched from her. And I found that difficult. Several weeks after I read her diary, I came home and pulled my diary off the shelf from that same time period and took it to the police station because I wanted to compare the two. And that was really difficult too, because one, I discovered that Melissa and I had 5 entries written on the same day, the last year of her life. So that was hard to see. We were both in completely different places in our life, but to know that my life has gone on and hers was so abruptly stolen was difficult. So yeah, I struggled with that. I still do when I think about it, just how difficult it was to read her diary. And her last entry in her diary, she talks about how her cat, her beloved cat, passed away. And that was just days before her own death. And that just seems to foreshadow a story that she never intended to write. And that was difficult too. So that's a good question, yeah. Yes?
I know I'm going to find all this out when I read the book, but I'll have to wait to read it because I'm busy with other true crime books to read. How far away was the crime scene from where they actually found the body?
60 miles, which is a long ways away. Because all of us that know the Ozarks very well, you can there are much faster ways, quicker ways, shorter distance to dispose of a body, so to speak. And so,
71 was the only way to get from here to there back then.
absolutely. So, she's kidnapped from Bowling World in Fort Smith, and her body's found 60 miles away in the Ozark National Forest on a logging road that there's no way that you would know how to get there unless you'd been there before. We know that Melissa died that night, and a lot of people ask me how we know that. Based on the contents of her stomach, we know what she had for lunch that day, and I'm not going to get into graphic details because we've got kiddos here today. But we also know that she died that night. She had inhaled debris and leaves that were native to the Ozark National Forest, and so we know that that's where she was strangled as well, which is just terrible. So whoever was there was either a hunter, a hiker, someone that's really, really familiar with the area. So it's very unlikely that someone just pulled into Bowling World and said, hey, I'm going to pick you. It was also league night, women's league night. So it's women my age and up that are bowling. And so it's, there have been arguments that, okay, well, a predator was trolling Bowling World parking lot. It's possible. It's, lots of things are possible, but not everything is probable. And I really do believe, as do investigators, that whoever took Melissa was there they knew she was going to be there that night. They'd had enough contact with her that they knew her schedule. And her mom bowled every Thursday night, so she was often there. And that would be familiar to someone. And whoever approached her that night was angry. I think she had probably, turned down their advances. Maybe it was a jilted boyfriend. Maybe it was someone that she just knew for a short amount of time, but they were angry. So that part of the crime has been really, really puzzling to people. Because, another thing to know is that her body was originally placed behind a rock in the Ozark National Forest, and that rock looks like a tombstone. And so investigators feel like that meant something to somebody, like they had been there before, kind of a favorite place to hunt or take their break or camp or deer hunt, all of those things that happen. So they think that's possible. But several days before Melissa's body was found, a call came in. I guess it was 2 days before her body was found. A call came in to the Major Crimes Unit in the evening on the answering machine. And this was before they had caller ID, if you can imagine a world without technology. I lived through it, so I think most of us did, but these guys up here don't know that. And it was what investigators believe was a grandmother and a grandson. And you hear the grandmother say, tell him what you found. Tell him what you saw. And you hear the boy say, no, and he hangs up. 2 days later, trappers who had been on that logging road the day before find Melissa's body. They think it's a mannequin. They get closer, they realize no. So someone had moved Melissa's body from behind the rock about 14 feet away from the rock so it could be seen by the road. I really think that it could have been the killer. More likely, though, it's someone that had had some trouble with law enforcement before. Maybe they had some felony charges. Maybe they had some trouble with drugs. Maybe they, were scared. But I really think that that's probably who found the body first and then called authorities. The task of moving her would have been really gruesome. She'd been out there the whole time. So that's important to remember, too. But investigators were never able to find who made that phone call. And, shortly after Melissa, was discovered, about 6 months later, Morgan Nick goes missing. Everybody knows who Morgan Nick is, the 6-year-old girl from Alma, Arkansas. So Melissa had been recovered, and all forces are going to find this 6-year-old girl, as they should. So it didn't put Melissa's case on the back burner. It was still important, but it did slow down what was happening in Melissa's case. And I think because of that, they didn't have the adequate resources to do what they needed to do. And then not long after Morgan Nick went missing, a tornado came through Fort Smith, and it actually destroyed a portion of the police department, and many of the files and different things with the case, not just this case, were destroyed. So trying to find that phone call now, I've tried to do that. I've spent many, many hours at the police department going through all the files and boxes, and we can't find it. Because my hope is that we could put it on social media and somebody would say, oh, that is my great-grandma, what is going on? Or, that's my aunt, or that was my mom. So we haven't had any success with that, unfortunately. But social media has been a huge tool for us in this case. And so any piece of information like that we can share is really important. Yes?
Back in the days where you were, when there were no cell phones and you got your phone bill and you could see every single person that called you, and those records, I don't know how they were ever preserved, probably, well, not digitally, obviously, but that is what has been restored, I'm guessing.
Yes. And the actual audio of that phone call, we can't find that. Not to say that it's not there somewhere, but I've spent a lot of years of my life looking for some of that stuff in the police department, and we've not been able to find it. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Isn't there some kind of, first off, would the killer maybe have had to know that area prior, since that was before internet and maps available, and so was that a big factor in nailing down who they think is a possible killer in this?
It is. So I'll talk about a couple of the really well-known suspects. One is Travis Crouch, and his name came up, I would say four or 5 years after Melissa's murder. And Travis Crouch grew up, his parents ran the church camp that's about 1.5 miles from where Melissa's body was found. And that was of interest because he was arrested in Colorado for kidnapping a girl in a parking lot and taking her to a remote mountaintop, and he made her strip down. He assaulted her. And the reason that she feels like she escaped with her life is because he passed out. He was on a lot of drugs. And he has a violent history. And so they did go and talk to him. Of course, he didn't admit to anything. The frightening thing is that we can place him in Ozark right around the time of her murder, but he didn't have access to a vehicle. He was actually a part of a motorcycle gang, believe it or not, but he had just gotten out of jail, and he only had access to his mother's car. And so police took that car, they seized it years later, and just tore it up looking for DNA. Nothing. And I write about Travis. I spent years trying to contact Travis. And I would write him a letter, and he wouldn't write me back, so I'd wait 6 months, and I'd write again. And this went on for about 5 years before he finally wrote me back. And, of course, everyone that's in prison is going to tell you that they're innocent. He's innocent of the crime he's been charged with, too, if you talk to him. But he's not been formally ruled out yet. I think when investigators can, they will rule him out. There's just not enough there. There's just not enough there. The number one suspect is a man named Larry Swearingen. And Larry has ties to Arkansas. His grandparents live in Clinton. And I believe it was in 97, 98, he's arrested for the murder of a 19-year-old girl in Conroe, Texas. Her name was Melissa Trotter. And he picks her up at her community college, and he drives her 60 miles away to the Sam Houston National Forest, where he assaults her and he strangles her and he leaves her. The murder is just almost identical to Witt's. And he immediately becomes really important to investigators. And they do everything they can to talk to him, but because he was in the state of Texas, he had been convicted of a capital crime, they were going to execute him. That's what they had decided they were going to do. So it made it a little bit more difficult for investigators here. J.C. Ryder was able to track down a receipt that put Swearingen in Clinton, Arkansas at a car parts store 2 days before her murder. So he becomes suspect number one because the crime is similar. There's other crimes that he's committed. People think he's a serial killer. They're looking at him all across the United States. And for years, I had a really volatile relationship with Larry Swearingen. I wrote to him on death row, and he wrote back to me, and I didn't like his response. And it was frustrating, I think, is probably better. And so he had someone write to me from Conroe, Texas, so I wouldn't have to go through the prison system. And he sent it to my house, and it wasn't very nice. And so that's how our relationship went. It was very, very volatile. I would write to him, he would issue me a cease and desist. I'd write to him again, and this went on for years. But because of social media, I had all sorts of people coming forward saying, hey, I think he potentially killed this girl, or hey, I was an investigator, I know that he did this. Supposedly there was a receipt that they found on Swearingen that tied him to Fort Smith, Arkansas in December of '94, but unfortunately that receipt was lost. And the last year of his life, I spent probably every week, I'm looking at my husband, faxing, emailing, calling, and writing letters to the DA's office in Montgomery County, Texas, begging them to let us talk to Swearingen. Please, you're going to execute him. He's had 5 stays. This is going to be the execution. And they got tired of hearing from the lady in Arkansas. And so they called Fort Smith PD and they said, please make it stop. Please come talk to Swearingen. We're going to let you do this. And so they go. It was Ryder, Boyd, and Detective Marion, who's the current detective on the case. And they get Swearingen in a room, and he said, well, hey, fellas, what are you here for? And Chris Boyd said, well, I am Chris Boyd with the Fort Smith Police Department. And Larry said, this interview's over. Goodbye. And he said, I want to be taken back to my cell. We were devastated by that because had he confessed to Melissa's murder, then he would have received a stay of his execution. But he chose not to do that. He just wouldn't talk at all. And so that leaves a big question mark for investigators. One of the things that happened in the case, and you can always look back in every case and say, hey, this was an uh-oh. But Larry was an electrician. He was a journeyman electrician. And so back in the 90s, investigators looked to pull permits under his name for everything that was around Fort Smith, Oklahoma, even into Missouri. And they didn't find anything under Larry Swearingen's name at all. And then I guess it was about 2017, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and it dawns on me that he was a journeyman electrician. It wouldn't have been under his name. It would have been under his stepdad's name. So I call J.C. Ryder, I wake him up. I tell him, hey, this is what I've discovered. And he, literally, and excuse my language, he just was like, damn. And so we do everything that we can to pull records at that point. But you're 20-something years later. There was nothing that we could get. And Swearingen's family was not going to work with us at this point. And they're deceased now at that point. So, if Swearingen if he murdered Melissa, it's going to take someone coming forward that remembers him and says, hey, I can place him in Fort Smith. And then we've got what we'll call the unknown suspect. I can't release, his name's not been released to the media, but it's someone that Melissa knew. And so investigators are looking at him really, really, really hard. And he knows, we joke that he's looking right back at us, but he looks pretty good for it too. But there's just some puzzle pieces that are missing, and until that we're able to get those, her case won't be solved.
Was there any DNA?
Yes and no. No DNA to tell us if she had been sexually assaulted, but that is the assumption based on the way her body was found. There was some DNA that was recovered from underneath her fingernails, and there's some other DNA that can be extracted with some new technology. And so we're hoping that from the proceeds of the book and we sell t-shirts and some things like that off our Facebook page, that we can raise the money that will be needed to use the new technology. I mean, we're pretty determined. And I'm hopeful about that. And there are some other things. We know that the killer most likely stole her Mickey Mouse watch. That's been a big focus of the case. And there's a chapter, one of the last chapters is called TikTok, and I write about the chase for the Mickey Mouse watch. And so we also believe that the killer took that as a memento, and that there are people that have seen him with it since. And we have a lot of people come forward. I mean, in 7 years, we've had some crazy, crazy chases for that watch. There's been a house raid, there's been a lot of interviews, there's just been some crazy stuff. But there's something special about the watch, so we would be able to know if it's Melissa's watch. I still believe that it's really possible that we could find it. I write about it pretty openly in the book, and so one of the suspects that I can't talk about ordered the book, so I know that he knows that we're looking at the watch. So that'll be interesting to see what that turns out to be. But there's enough information there that it's not like her case is 27 years old and there's just not enough there to solve the case. It's a completely solvable case. It's just we got to have the right people come forward. So, yes.
Did y'all have anyone, I worked with Melissa,
Oh,
and she,
I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming.
thank you, I'm sorry I was late.
No.
Anyway, she was part of the ambassadors, the students that worked with Penny Pendleton. Did y'all have any contact with that office early on, I guess, would be my question. I was there just that one, I get 95, my husband is a pastor, and we moved from there that spring, or that summer in June. We moved to Harvey, Arkansas. But because of being in Penny Pendleton's office, she was admissions office, I think was what.
I think that's correct.
It was Westark.
Yeah.
And Melissa was always the first one there. Every day that she came in, which I want to say that was probably Monday through Friday, but I can't remember. I've done so many other things since then. But I was always so proud that somebody cared enough to come in. I mean, sometimes she was probably there before I was, at like 10 till 8,
Oh,
or 8
wow.
o'clock in the morning. And the morning that she didn't show up, immediately, I mean, I had
think that,
Because we were already gone, I think, had moved.
well, first and foremost, I'm very honored that you're here, and it,
I feel a connection. And did you by chance work at Westark at that time? Or you, because we had a young lady in the office with us, and her name was LaDonna.
oh, wow.
And I had another student
Wow.
worker named Stacy.
I did not. So I lived in Southwest Oklahoma. I was born and raised there until I was 12. And then I moved to Greenwood, Arkansas. And so I lived there for about a year, and then we moved to Northwest. I have some really close friends that are that were very close to Melissa. So we never knew each other, but we knew a lot of people that knew each other. So I would love to talk to you afterwards a little bit, if that's okay. I would like to do that. Any chance that I ever get to talk to anybody that actually knew Melissa is so important, and so I try to gather that information. But to answer your question, investigators spent a couple of years going through information about Westark, her being an ambassador, some sort of connection to, the community college. Because one of the things that I had brought to investigators' attention, and I still wonder about it, there was a lot of construction happening on the campus at that time. And so in my mind, could that be a Larry Swearingen that's doing some, electrical work that sees Melissa, strikes up a conversation? Because, yes, and he was a murderer, but when he was younger, he would have gotten a young woman's attention because he was a nice-looking young man. So I always wonder about that. But Melissa is just described as this really sweet, kind, hardworking girl, and she would have been really easy to take advantage of in a parking lot at night, especially if she's being accosted in such a way where she's being yelled at or she doesn't know how to handle herself. Because, this was the first time a crime like this had ever happened in Fort Smith, like this. There was crime, but there wasn't a 19-year-old all-American girl that's plucked from a parking lot and just disappears. That just was new. So, and I think that's part of what has really captured the heart of investigators, particularly with the mom. J.C. Ryder was very close to Melissa's mom. They built a really great relationship because of the murder, and she wanted so much for her daughter's case to be solved. She wanted to know who murdered her and why. And then, of course, unfortunately, she passed away in 2010. So, it's very, very sad.
Do you have pictures of these people that are close interests, it's like Swearingen? Do you have any pictures of him from that time?
I do. Yeah, we can trade some information when I leave, and I'll let you see him.
Video of who, the video was titled, "Who Comes to Westark?" And I still have that, and I'm gonna say that I'm real sure that Melissa has to be on that, and I don't know who else, I don't remember. But there was Matt Matt, and me, and just a whole different group of folks on that, so I'll make sure I get that to you.
Okay, if we could have a copy of that, I would pay to make a copy of that. That would be amazing. That would be important. That's one of the things that we've tried to do. This is Isabella. She is my 5-year-old daughter, and it's amazing I was able to write a book with Isabella at home. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi.
You totally lost my train of thought. One of the things that we've done with social media is that we've tried to collect videos and photos from that time period, particularly of where she went to class, places that she would have been, people that we want to see. And I'm always looking at that, just poring over that, trying to see, that one little piece of the puzzle. So, yeah, I'll exchange some information with you before we leave. Yes. Here you go. Go sit by Dad. That just made her day that she got to come up here. So, are there any other questions? No? Well, I would like for everybody to take a book today. So that's my gift to you. Thank you for coming to hear me speak. I'm really new to speaking. It makes me a little nervous. So thank you for being patient with me. But if I can answer any other questions, I will. if you haven't read the book, then you won't know that it ends with a cliffhanger. So now you know, that's a spoiler. And there will be the second part of the second book will be out in a year. So I'm furiously working on that. And then, please follow us on Facebook. We have about 14,000 people that follow us on Who Killed Missy Witt. Please do that. I mean, you just never know what piece of information you'll share. Social media is amazing like that. So we've had our posts shared over 3.5 million times now in the past 7 years, and I just know that eventually somebody's going to see the information and say, I know who that was, or this person told me this, or my Uncle Greg has this under his bed. That's really kind of what we think will happen. So please definitely follow and tell other people. And thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. So I have a question. I have lots of questions for you.